Hi folks, welcome back to the channel. My name is Drew. I'm an exercise physiologist, acupuncturist. I do a lot of exercise rehabilitation, and I kind of live in this world of traditional Eastern medicine and modern exercise sports science. And I focus particularly on functional rehabilitation, which has been my world for probably the last 20 years. So I do a combination of training people in the gym with all kinds of different exercises. I'm not really married to any particular style system. It's whatever works for the person. So I love functional strength training with kettlebells, just traditional gym training, integrating yoga, Pilates, gymnastic strength training. If it works, I'm going to use it. When you look at the body and you understand how the body works, all these systems are all training the same stuff. It's just personal preference, really, and the style, what people have got accessible to, all those kind of things. And then with Chinese medicine, we look particularly at I use acupuncture and for functional rehabilitation and injury rehabilitation. And in Chinese medicine, we're looking at the energetic system particularly. So how the body's bioenergetic system is functioning, and can tissues get enough voltage to generate ATP, which is the cellular energy molecule, which all cells need to function. So if we're trying to heal tissue, we need voltage, or we need electrical charge to get to the tissues. And acupuncture is an amazing way of helping facilitate that. So sometimes it's an energy system problem where tissue is not healing good enough because we're not getting charge. Sometimes it's a functional problem because the tissue hasn't been functionally retrained after injury, and so it's weak, or it's dysfunctionally adapted. So depending on the situation, we're going to either work on someone's energetic system to help with the healing process, or we're going to actually retrain the body to help the physical process. And the goal is to get them both working optimally. And a big part of that is to understand anatomy. So the anatomy is really the basis of all kind of allied health therapy based protocols. So whether you're a personal trainer, a Pilates instructor, a yoga instructor, if you're a allied health professional, so physio, chiro, osteo, podiatrist, exercise physiologist, we're all working with the same stuff. And when you have a good understanding of the human body and how it works functionally, you can kind of then make some really good clinical decisions for yourself and for your clients. And that's what it's all about. So just hopefully you're going to share a bit of my understanding of the body, of how it works, particularly from the two lenses of functional rehabilitation and Chinese medicine, particularly. Today, we're going to be looking at the calf group. So with the calf, we have really two muscles. We've got the gastrocnemius, which has two heads, a medial head, so inside, and lateral head on the outside. And then underneath that, we have the soleus muscle, which I'll isolate, which sits under that. And it and the gastrocnemius share this common tendon called the Achilles tendon, which I'm sure you've most likely heard about. So to understand how muscles work, we need to have an appreciation of where they actually attach on the skeletal system, because when muscles contract, they pull on the bones, and that creates the movement. So we need to understand how the movement's generated by the muscle contraction. And to appreciate that, we just need some basic anatomy kind of understanding. So let's start with the gastrocnemius. Its medial head attaches onto the femur in this kind of medial femoral condyle region here. And then the lateral head attaches to the lateral femoral condyle here. The most important thing to appreciate is that the gastrocnemius crosses the knee joint. So anytime the muscle contracts, it's going to affect the knee joint in addition to the ankle joint. So it's what we call a multi-joint muscle. If you compare that to the soleus, so if I put soleus on the right side, soleus, and we'll go right. You can see on the right side, the soleus is a huge muscle. It's kind of a bit flatter than the gastroc. You can see the gastroc's got these big muscle bellies. The soleus is a bit flatter. The gastroc sits on top of the soleus, and it attaches to the fibula, which is that long thin bone that comes down the outside of your leg, and also attaches fascially right down the line of the tibia as well. So essentially, you can kind of view the soleus bank attaching to the whole back of the tibia. Okay. Now, this muscle doesn't cross the knee joint, so it doesn't affect the knee, but it does attach to the Achilles tendon here, joins with the Achilles tendon, and goes down onto the calcaneus here on both sides. So essentially at the distal end, the gastrocnemius and the soleus become one muscle, but at the proximal end, they have differences in that the soleus only affects the lower limb, whereas the gastroc crosses the knee, so affects the knee. The big difference is there that when the gastroc contracts, if the foot is fixed to the ground, it's going to then have this action of trying to flex the knee. So if you're going to visualize the muscle being pulled this way or the muscle being pulled this way, either way, if this foot is fixed, so there's no movement at the ankle, it's going to pull the leg back this way. All right. Or if the leg is free, it's going to help and then flex the heel up towards your bum. So what we call knee flexion. So if the calves are super tight, it's going to keep pulling your knees back into hyperextension. All right, so it's going to keep locking knees out, and that's going to compromise the front of the knee, particularly the meniscus. It'll compromise the way the quads can work. It'll basically create really tight quads, and it's going to create some issues with just the function of the knee and the function of the ankle, because if the calves are tight, then range of movement has to come through somewhere. It'll either come through the ankle, it'll come through the knee, or it might even travel up into the hip, and the hip joint will try to give the body enough space to create the movement. So that's why we want really good flexibility and mobility. Flexibility relates to the ability of the muscle contract and then return back to its resting length. So full contraction and then coming back to its resting length. Mobility is the ability of the actual joint to move through its full range. So what we want is a muscle that can contract and move the joint through the full range with control and then return back to the end range movement with control. That's the kind of the goal. So that requires a combination of strength, mobility, and flexibility. And you get those three pieces right across every joint and across every major muscle group, then you have really good functional movement, and 90% of kind of like injuries and niggles just kind of go away. So when you train movement properly, you address movement, then you will get to a stage where you can have a pain-free body, which is pretty cool. And then, of course, you would just address any injuries that have happened through trauma or accident, or just, living life in general. So basically, at some point, everyone's going to have some kind of injury just because that's living life, right? So if you look at then the gastrocnemius, it only crosses down here across the ankle. So it only moves the ankle joint. And when the gastrocnemius and the calf and the soleus contract, they create what's called plantar flexion, where you point your foot away. All right. So we really have two movements in this kind of muscle group. We have knee flexion and what's called plantar flexion, which is where you're kind of straightening the foot out. And that's a really, really important kind of combination for any kind of running, walking, stepping, jumping movement. Okay, so then let's look at the nerve supply. As always, I'm using Complete Anatomy. Highly recommend that you get this app if you're interested in anatomy. I'm just going to scratch the surface in this one. So I want you guys to kind of go and get your own copy of Complete Anatomy, and you can dig down into all the super detailing. Okay, but essentially the innovation here is the tibial nerve. So S1, S2. So that comes out of, so that's L5 there, and that's the sacrum. So S1, S2 is that hole there, basically. And so they're going to coming out of you basically of your sacrum through here. This is important. If you do get kind of some lower back SIJ issues, it can impinge or compress the tibial nerve on the sciatic nerve coming down, which then can kind of give you issues in the calf. So sometimes if people have got like particularly this L5 S1 issue here, it can kind of create really tight calves if the nerves getting a little bit interfered with or compressed. And in a really bad scenario, you get what's called foot drop. So where the ankle itself isn't functioning, and you get this kind of the tibia anterior in the front, so not so much the gastroc or the soleus, stops the function, and you don't get the opposite of plantar flexion. You don't get dorsiflexion. That's an issue because you can kind of trip on your big toe and fall over a lot, which is not cool. But we'll get to that when we do the anterior compartment. So speaking of anterior compartment, one thing to kind of appreciate is there's really what we call 4 compartments in the lower limb. So lower limb is kind of knee down, and we've got the posterior compartment, which comprises of the gastrocnemius and the soleus. And we'll do another video on the deep compartment, which has things like your tibialis posterior, flexor hallucis longus, flexor digitorum, so the deeper muscles affect the toe movements particularly, and support the arch of your foot. Then on the side, we have the perineals, okay, so they control ankle roll. And then on the front, we have the anterior compartment, which is like tib anterior, extensor digitorum, extensor hallucis. And so they control plantar flexion and toe movement particularly. So we have 4 compartments of the lower limb, and we'll do a video on each one so we can break them all down for you. All right, let's look at the movement in the gastroc section. So we go to motion in the our app, and we just press on here. I've got a pretty good computer. I'm a bit of a nerd gamer, so I've got a good nerd gaming computer. So just be patient if you're using Complete Anatomy, because it's actually doing a lot of stuff in the background to get it working. And let's have a look. For some reason, there we go. That's why it wasn't coming up. All right, so here we have both the gastrocnemius and the calcaneus contracting. And here we have what's called plantar flexion. So here you'll get the strong muscle belly. The soleus and the gastroc are both contracting to pull the calcaneus upwards, which then kind of hinges. So the whole ankle joint's a big hinge through here, and it just hinges up. So then you get this kind of pushing the foot down into the ground. So you can imagine if you're walking along, so as you go through the swing phase and you go into what's called push off, you get this gastrocnemius clicking on and contracting with the soleus, and it lifts the heel up and then presses the foot into the ground. Here, you're not seeing it, but the big toe would then be kind of like doing that as well. So you get this big toe off. So that's the main movement through the calf group, sometimes known as the triceps surae group as well. And for my dry needling acupuncture friends, we have this really cool acupuncture point, which I'll do a whole video on at some point in here. This is on the lateral side. So how do you know which one's the lateral, which one's the medial? So where the big toes on the inside, the little toes on the outside. So lateral side here, we're going to have what's called bladder 60 in here. So there's this whole space between the Achilles tendon and the muscles of the posterior compartment. And on the lateral side, you've got bladder 60. And then on the medial side, essentially in the same position, but just on the inside, we have what's called kidney 3 here. And there's a cool acupuncture technique where what's called through needling, where you needle through both. So you get a long needle and you just stick it through both. So you get bladder 60 and then kidney 3. And both those 2 points are amazing for back problems, because in Chinese medicine, the kidney point is related to the lower back, and so is the bladder. So it's a great point to treat the ankle, because you've got 2 big meridians are like highways or big conductive streaming potentials where the energy moves through the body via the connective tissue, right? So we get that big stimulation through here. So this is a must do for any Achilles problems, but also when we look at the channel theory later, you'll see that that goes up into the lower back. So it's great for lower back injuries, particularly. So really, really cool acupuncture points there, which we will get into. The other cool ones you'll find here, there's a couple of acupuncture points in the bladder channel, just here around the musculotendinous junction. So that's super important, because in the musculotendinous junction, that's typically a area where you'll get a lot of injuries occur, because there's always a bit of a vulnerability when you go from muscle tissue to connective tissue and tendon. So we've got some nice acupuncture points through here. And then you've also got some, they're not really acupuncture points in Chinese medicine, but we've got big trigger points here in both heads of the gastrocnemius, just kind of on this area where see where it kind of curves over the condyle of the femur. So that pointer here is going to create a lot of tension in the tissue. So typically you'll find them just below here. There's usually two, 1, 2, and then another, or 1, 2. Travell and Simons have got the kind of the Bible on trigger points, so you can always check those out. But again, I'll do a video on these coming down. So when you're getting massage techniques done, if the massage therapist gets up to here, it's usually pretty uncomfortable. Some big knots that occur there. You'll also get some big knots through here. Essentially, a knot or adhesion is just where the muscle fibers are contracting, and they contract and they slide. So when the muscle contracts, they basically kind of ratchet across each other, and then when they relax, they should just slide back. But sometimes they contract, and for whatever reason, it might be a neurochemical. So you're not releasing the right chemicals, or you're not getting the right neurological signals to actually relax the muscle, and they kind of stay where they are. And then there are lubricants that are released in the tissue as well. Hyaluronic acid's one. So if the tissue is not moving, it doesn't get lubricated, so they can actually kind of like physically or mechanically kind of get a little bit stuck and jammed up. And so that restricts the movement of the muscle within that fiber. So you might have like here where you've got this kind of crossover of fibers coming down. You might typically get some knots develop here because there's a lot of mechanical tension coming through there. And so the body will react by trying to like stiffen up a little bit. But so this is where your body work stuff becomes really important. If you're not doing regular body maintenance work, over time, you can get these little micro adhesions, and the kind of fibers get stuck and they don't release from the contraction. And that kind of creates tension and issue. And then it kind of feeds into some kind of muscular issues. Interesting, we still don't fully understand how muscles contract and relax. And there's still a fair bit of debate in the whole kind of field about it. But if you talk to any body worker, any good remedial massage therapist, any good chiro, physio, acupuncturist, anyone who understands or has hands on bodies, like you can feel the tension in the tissues, and then you can feel the restriction. And when you apply techniques, you can see the changes that happen really quickly when the muscle basically gets reminded that it can relax, and it can go back to its resting position. So it's some pretty cool stuff going on through there. So it's always a combination of neurological signals. Are we getting the right signals to the muscles? That's usually the most quickest adaptation you can change. It's just basically remind the body about the optimal resting position of the muscle, because muscles only contract through neurological signaling coming into the system. Then there's like the chemical processes. So are we getting enough kind of chemical markers to help facilitate muscle contraction? Have we got enough energy? So do we have enough electrical voltage coming up through the fascial network and meridian system to supply energy to the tissue so they can contract correctly and then heal and repair tissue, which requires cellular energy to do? And then there's this kind of like biomechanical. Do we have like good posture, good technique? Is it well trained? And then also then we have this kind of functionality to what are you doing posturally, habitually during the day? And so all these things, they stack up and they're all important. And so we need to kind of work out which one is which. And the common thing for Achilles and calf issues is people's footwear. Now, I'm very controversial. I am very much wear bare feet type of guy as much as possible, where it's practical, where it's safe. So if you're training in the gym, you're in bare feet. Okay. Yoga, dance, martial arts. I've been training in bare feet for centuries. All right. We're designed to be barefoot. All right. And so when you encase your foot in lots of footwear, and particularly with footwear that has arch supports that don't match your natural shape of your foot or elevated heels, you create these kind of structural changes through the Achilles particularly. And over a long period of time, that can kind of create adaptive shortening of the tissue, which creates tension. which then changes the biomechanics of the ankle and the knee, which is a shit show. So where possible, wear bare feet. I'm always in bare feet. Okay. The only reason we have to wear footwear in the gym is to protect your feet from dropping weights on it. Now, if you've ever been in a gym and you've been lifting weights, if you drop a 40 kilo dumbbell on your foot, you know, a little strap of leather on the top of your sole is not going to do anything. So that's a fucking stupid thing. The only thing is more hygiene, because you're walking around in shared spaces. But in the gym, it's fine. It's only when you get into damp spaces, like in pools and things like that, where you got a lot of dampness, you can get, you know, things like bacterial growth and tinea and stuff like that. So if you're going into shared change rooms where there's lots of kind of heat and damp, in my opinion, then you'd probably want to be having some footwear on. But actually training, all right, be in bare feet as much as you can. It's the go. It's the go. So we have plantar flexion is the is the main role, and it's not shown here, but then you'll also get knee flexion. So you can see if you keep bending, contracting this muscle group, it's going to then help to flex the knee. So the calves work in conjunction with the hamstrings, which is the muscle group above it, in knee flexion. Okay. So in that way, you say that the knee flexion, the hamstrings are the primary or the main muscle or the antagonist in agonist, sorry, in creating knee flexion or knee bending, and then the calves will be a secondary assisting muscle in that role. If the hamstrings get weak for whatever reason, then the calves become a primary, like they try to compensate, and then you get super tight calves, and that's an issue as well. So anywhere along the kinetic chain, if you have an issue where there's not a muscle balance or individual muscle groups aren't doing their jobs, the collective of the body kind of gets compromised and other regions have to kind of like take up the load or the slack. And that's where you develop these kind of weird postural adaptations and structural dysfunctions, which then typically manifest in kind of like chronic pain type scenarios where people just keep getting niggling injuries or they just have pain and discomfort. And you know, this is kind of you're on the track here because you'll go and get X-ray, MRI, CT scan, ultrasound, and there's nothing really coming back. Like tissues all fine. There's no injuries per se. They might pick up some inflammation and stuff like that, but there's no structural damage. So when I get a client coming in with that kind of scenario, I know, okay, it's not structural damage. It's something they're doing in their day-to-day life. So it's either their training or their work role or their habitual role. There's something they're doing that's creating a poor posture, which is going to basically train the muscles to be very dysfunctional, and we don't want to do that. Okay, so that's kind of like a nice little overview of the calf group. Super powerful. This Achilles tendon business here. Oh, let me just talk about the Achilles tendon. So let me get out of this bit here. Okay. All right. So the Achilles tendon is super cool. It's a long tendon and it's designed to take about 14 times your body weight in force. So if you weigh 100 kilos, you can take up to, you know, over a ton of energy coming up and down through the kinetic chain here. So it's designed to take a lot of force, but we can still injure it. And typically the injuries happen in 3 locations, either here, where the Achilles tendon attaches to the calcaneus or the heel bone. And we often get what's called bursitis here. So there's a little bursa sac here, which basically stops the Achilles rubbing into the bone. That can get irritated and you can get this really uncomfortable kind of bursa issue there. That's always related to either the calves are super tight or you got struck in the heel. So maybe you're playing soccer and someone, you know, accidentally kicked you in the back of your foot and it just basically irritated the Achilles and bursa. Next region, you'll get Achilles tendonitis, inflammation of the tendon, which can kind of happen basically anywhere in the tendon, but typically it tends to happen through this kind of lower third region. And then you get ruptures, so tears coming through here where you start getting fiber tearing. All right, so that can either be to like a mild strain or you start to get fiber tearing up to a full rupture where the tissue's basically just snapping. which is not cool. If you fully rupture your Achilles tendon, that's at least an 18-month rehabilitation, because you'll have to have it surgically repaired, and then you'll have to retrain the tendon over a slow, long period of time. And you just got to think about the role of the Achilles and the calf. When you go for a walk, if you walk for, so for example, I come from a town called Ballarat in Australia, Victoria, and we have a lake which is exactly 6 kilometers around. All right, so it's a very, very popular exercise place. And so if you walk around Lake Wendouree and your stride rate is 1 meter per stride, okay, so 1 meter per kilometer, one step per kilometer, that's 1,000 steps, times 6, that's 6,000 steps. So if you just go for a 6K walk, roughly that's 6,000 steps. So you've got to train this muscle group and this tendon to be able to tolerate 6,000 little micro plyometric jumps, which basically a walk is you're transferring weight like a big spring. And so you got to retrain the springiness of it. But before you can do that, you've got to heal the connective tissue and the tendon itself. So that's a whole process, just takes a long time. So you've got to allow that to happen. So part of my job is to guide people through the adaptation phase, the healing phase of what to do, when to do it, how to do it during the different phases of the rehabilitation. Okay, because if you go too quick, if you're too aggressive, then you'll basically you'll re-tear the tissue. If you don't train, the tissue will heal, but it won't adapt. You won't get strong connective tissue, and then you'll have all this kind of dysfunction and restriction down the track. So if you don't get it right, and as you're going through, it kind of manifests later down the track into all kinds of weirdness, which we don't want. So super cool. And then the last one here is musculotendinous junction. You'll often get lots of kind of like calf tears and irritation through this region here, just because there's a lot of forces coming through, and it's a bit vulnerable, just where the muscle meets tendon. Weirdly enough, you don't often see soleus stuff because it's just a really big, diverse muscle. It's got a thicker tendon at the bottom. But here, I think this is Drew theory, is that where it meets the tendon here, this is typically where you'll get a lot of the injuries occur, like those tendonitis, tendinopathy type situations. And the way to treat a tendinopathy is you have to get a combination of body work, so massage, acupuncture, and strength training, eccentric strength training. You got to do it. You got to do a lot of it. You're going to be doing calf raises, more calf raises. You got to get all that stuff in. Lots of tib anterior strengthening work. The full protocol that you typically need to do to get your Achilles back in action. The best way is not to get injured in the first place, and the best way not to get injured in the first place is just to train smart. Okay, think about training movement. Okay, so typically the hierarchy I walk people through will be medical, so we address any medical issues first. All right, then functional, so we train the body so it's actually moving the way it's designed to move. So you functionally train the body. Then you can start employing fitness-based work, and then at the top here you go into like high performance type stuff. Typically where people go wrong is they go from medical straight to fitness into performance, and they skip this all this process in the middle, and that just sets them up for injury coming down the track. We don't want that. Okay, so that's a nice little overview of the gastrocs. Remember, guys, we want to have strong muscles, we want flexible muscles, and we want really good joint mobility. So your programming should have a combination of those three things. Okay, strength training, particularly in the calves, they need to be strong to tolerate that 1,000 tons, one ton of forces coming through the Achilles. They need to be endurable because they need to do a lot of repetition. So strength endurance training is critical for calf rehab and tendon rehab. Particularly eccentric tendon training is the go. We also need flexibility to take the muscle through its full range of movement, both across the knee and across the ankle. And then we also need joint mobility. So we want to be able to train the joints. Joints are where bones meet bones, to be able to move through the full range. So then your body's got access to the freedom of movement that have. And when you get those three things working together, often in my experience, most injuries resolve, they go away, and you can kind of get to a point where you are pain-free, injury-free, and then you can really enjoy your movement and doing whatever it is that you love to do in life. And that's the goal. And that's my passion in helping people get to that point. Because if you've ever been to a point where you've been injured or not well, it really sucks. And just working your way back to health and wellness and function is awesome. So I hope you really enjoyed that video. Any questions, as always, leave a comment down below. Please like and share. We'd really love to grow this channel and just spread the knowledge. And yeah, please, any questions? Love to hear from you. All right, wherever you are, have an amazing day, and I'll see you in the next video.